Hi, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on moonshots, spinouts, and new ventures. I'm Alexandra Bacchus, and I'm part of the Newlab team. Many of you might be familiar with our work at Newlab, but others may be encountering us for the first time today. Thank you for joining. For those of you not familiar with Newlab, we're a community of experts and innovators applying transformative technology to solve the world's biggest challenges. Through our membership and studios, we bring together entrepreneurs, engineers, inventors, and industry leaders to create sustainable solutions and enterprises. We employ technologies including robotics, AI, and material science to transform what matters most: health, environment, media, cities, and infrastructure. That mission has taken on a whole new meaning during the pandemic. So today we'll cover the various approaches to venture creation, specifically venture studios, which are a relatively new form of entrepreneurship, and pair up with industry experts, advisors, and talent instead of going at it alone. I'm paneled by Wendy Su, partner of New Business Ventures at Alicorp, Tom Hunt, technology scout at X, the Moonshot Factory, and Fernando Gomez Baquero, director of Runway and Spinouts at Cornell Tech. Our panelists are looking to field questions from the audience, so to ask a question, please use the Q&A button, and I'll help get those in front of our panelists. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Shaun.
Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. The topic today is obviously around venture creation. Newlab itself has a venture studio model, but that won't be the focus today of our topic, as we have three great leaders across venture capital, academia, and corporate venture and innovation to talk to you today. For what it's worth, the process we go through here at Newlab regarding venture studio and venture creation is really the simplified 4 steps, which is we look for founders and focus areas, relevant technologies that they have expertise in, and then use our innovation studios to come up with product challenges, industry opportunities for innovation. We then launch new ventures around those, both funding them with capital, but also giving them access to the Newlab team across finance, marketing, operations, legal, other departments, and core assets and services needed to succeed. We then help them activate and power through pilots, corporate partnerships, and early stage commercial partnerships, but then help them actually exit the program and mature on their own independently. The most prominent examples from this year have been related to COVID-19. Spiro Devices was one of the companies coming out of our venture studio that was focused on a need delivered to us by the New York City government to develop 3,000 ventilator alternatives for New York City hospitals in the second quarter of 2020. With the same topic in mind, Applied Excel was a venture company coming out of our venture studio, founded by Francesco Marconi, the previous head of AI and R&D at the Wall Street Journal. And Applied Excel was a company that he built here at Newlab in our venture studio, focused on data science and the tracking of health, people, places, and the planet overall. But today, we're really talking to 3 great experts in the field around leading venture creation models to understand how their approaches differ and how founders can consider these opportunities out there. We'd love to start with Wendy from Alicorp, someone we've known here at Newlab for many years since we've opened, and is part of a key player in the New York City ecosystem regarding funding and supporting early stage ventures. Wendy, thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to have you. It'd be great for you to start by maybe giving everyone an introduction to Alicorp and a little bit of insight into what venture creation looks like in your world.
Absolutely. So Alicorp, we were started actually in 2007. So we've been around for quite some time. We are predominantly focused on New York City ventures, New York ventures. So all the companies that you see here are those that were founded and incubated here in New York. TrueBird, one of our own, actually being a core part of Newlab. So for us at Alicorp, we do 2 things. We invest in early stage startups as any other pre-seed investor or seed investor would. That's, I would say, probably 40% of the time. There are 60% of the time then is focused on our incubation work. And so what that means is we have our own internal teams, mostly those who are former operators, either former engineers, former product leaders, et cetera, where we identify pain points, and of the few thousand pain points every year that we surface, we'll narrow down on a few certain areas, of which then we start beginning to think through what could a concept look like. The same criteria that we use to evaluate investments that we make externally is the same that we do internally for us at Alicorp as well. Competitive landscape, market, how large the market is, founder fit, team fit, et cetera. The difference is in our incubation work, we form the founding teams. So think of Alicorp as another co-founder on the cap table. We also though invest as the first $1 million to $1.5 million into our new co-concepts. Companies that we founded include those that you see on this site. They include things like MongoDB, Guild Group, Zola, Business Insider. Every year or so, we'll launch about 1 to 3 companies, industry agnostic, healthcare, enterprise SaaS, consumer, food and beverage, you name it.
Amazing. And it's amazing to look back at that progression, how some of those are such day-to-day brands now, like Business Insider and Zola, and certainly the expectation that Diana Health and Core will be that equivalent in a few years. Well, thanks for joining us. Next up, Tom, it'd be great to get an introduction to obviously the corporate venture approach and corporate innovation structure that you're a part of at X, part of Alphabet.
It's a pleasure to be here today. So X is Alphabet's moonshot factory, and we aim to tackle some of the biggest, to develop technologies to tackle some of the world's biggest problems. That's what we're really all about at X. And some of the highlights you see on the screen in front of you. So we're best known for Waymo, the self-driving car. Also, Verily, the life sciences company, came out of X. And so that means that we really span the breadth of pretty much any technology that you can imagine. Google Brain also came out of X and went back into Google. And so we do pure software. We often do software combined with hardware, anything where we can really bring our core expertise to bear on some of the world's biggest problems. The most recent announcement we've made is around agriculture and smart agriculture. How do we, and this is kind of example of one of those big problems, how do we feed 10 billion people in this world without destroying the planet? We think that technology and smart agriculture really has something to bring to bear on that problem. So a little bit different from a venture investment perspective, we basically incubate these technologies in-house. And so my job at X is to go out in the world, find outstanding entrepreneurs, interesting technologies. They could be in seed stage companies, they could be in big companies, they could be in academia. Take those as the core of one of these moonshot technologies, essentially spin them in to X and build that capability up until it is an internal company under the Alphabet umbrella that can stand on its own. So that's what we do here at X, and excited to tell you more about it.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us, Tom. I know you're busy. And then last but certainly not least, Fernando, it'd be great to get an understanding of the Cornell kind of Tech Institute and how they approach the same concept of innovation, but from a venture creation and academia perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Shaun. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Fernando. I'm the director of Runway and Spinouts at the Jacobs Technion Cornell Institute. So for those of you that have been in New York, you have seen a brand new campus forming in Roosevelt Island. We've been open for 3 years. But Cornell Tech has been operating for about 7 years before in the city, before the campus was open. Within that campus of Cornell Tech, we have a collaboration with the Technion called the Jacobs Technion Cornell Institute. It was founded by a very generous gift of the Jacobs family, founders of Qualcomm. And our goal with the Jacobs Institute is to do all of those things that academia is very bad at, which is basically trying to really figure out how to do commercialization, be more mindful on how to take the academic knowledge into the commercial space, experiment, helping populations that are underserved or that really no one has really taken care of. And those little things that are usually difficult to do. Also fighting a little bit within academia, which is fine. It's finding those opportunities to rethink academia from the inside and do a lot of experimentations, a lot of new programs, failing as we should, but also succeeding in doing interesting entrepreneurship programs. But we do have a laser focus on helping entrepreneurs, and by doing that, creating economic growth for the city of New York.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for joining us. And it's great to have a couple of people local here in New York enjoying 35-degree weather today. Fernando, if maybe we continue to kind of pick on you a little bit. You obviously have to bridge the gap between academia and partnerships. And so compared to innovators and entrepreneurs being in a Google X type environment or going through an Alicorp kind of VC experience of venture growth, what are the benefits to doing so in academia that people should be aware of?
I think it's a blessing and a curse, right? So to be honest, it has both sides. The blessing is that you have so many amazing, talented, really innovative people. The academic environment is a catalyst for new technologies, for new ideas, for doing things that are very bold. So you really get to be around people that have the technical expertise, have the technical knowledge. They're bold to put some crazy idea out there, and they take the time to actually do it. So that's awesome. But at the same time, you have an environment that does not necessarily align with what the commercialization or venture, let's say, world wants to do. There is a big challenge actually in uniting both of them, which is what we're working to do. But definitely the benefit is that community, and I would say that nowadays I've seen more and more, and actually Google X is also a good example. There's great people with a lot of academic background there. So you see more and more this protruding outside of academia, and that is awesome. Seeing those communities of innovators just build and build and build up. And my hope is that in the future is not just a feature of the academic environment, but that becomes just generalized all over.
Yeah, and when it comes to the objectives of the work at the Jacobs Institute, is it any different in regards to the outcomes, the timeline you expect them, the objectives, the KPIs, than kind of the corporate venture of Google X or the venture capital approach of Alicorp? Are you looking for the same thing, which is growth in valuation and revenue, or is it different?
No, it is very different. So we are not looking for your traditional metrics of a venture capital approach of return on revenue, and that's good. We really tend to think more of impact, and what does impact mean. So there's economic impact, there's social impact, there's impact on the person itself. So a lot of what we do is just to give better opportunities to these entrepreneurs to get more knowledge, whether they do a company or not. It doesn't really matter. At the end, we gave them an additional path towards what they want to do in life, or we just show them that was not the path, and then they can go back to the path that they were before. So all those three are big for us. Impact is a big word, and we do want to. We have some metrics where we show both economic impact. We're trying to be more mindful of the social impact as well, and do some efforts into measuring that, and people. And so it's a great place to be, but at the same time, we're not going to perform like a VC, and that's fine. We fill a gap that I always say VC shouldn't invest in the companies that we invest, because it makes no sense at all. We are crazy, absolutely crazy. No one should invest in that, but that's the point. The point is we bridge that gap. If it works out, we took the risk and we help people, and we de-risked it for other people. If it doesn't, we took the risk, we made someone better, we gave them more education, we made an impact.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win for us, which makes my job pretty easy.
It doesn't seem that easy. So Tom, in comparison, like, what's success for X? Like the KPI, the objectives quarter to quarter, year to year, what are you pressured to deliver when it comes to the outcomes coming out of X as a Moonshot Factory?
Yeah, we have to deliver new alphabet companies. So Alphabet's an interesting structure where, Google is one of the companies, and the things that we work on, not only do we want them to be amazingly beneficial to the world, like a self-driving car would be, prevent hundreds of thousands of automotive deaths on the road, but beyond being good for the world, they have to actually have a value that's important in a company as big as Alphabet. And so that means that we're looking for really some of the, to try to apply technology to some of the most challenging problems in the world. And we really do believe that the only way to scale these things is as a for-profit business. That charity is wonderful, but to scale something to a global impact, it really has to pay its own way.
And you're responsible for scouting both technology, but also the entrepreneurs and potential leaders. And so kind of chicken and egg question, like what comes first? Is it finding a great founder and then aligning them with a problem that you believe in? Or is it finding the problem first and then trying to look for leadership to execute?
Yeah, we really like to be problem first, if at all possible, because once we identify the problem, we actually first try to bring generalists to bear on that problem, because they don't have the same mindset as somebody who's been working on agriculture for 20 years, right? They really have an outsider's view. But then once a project starts to get off the ground internally, they might not have the depth of expertise that somebody who has a career in it. So we need that outside point of view at the beginning from a generalist, and then we bring in the industry experts as we bring a project forward.
Yeah. And the approach, obviously, within X, how do you feel it resolves some of the pain points for a typical entrepreneur? Like, what is, I guess, the pitch that says it's better to do it through this approach than doing it on your own?
Yeah, it's a great question. We think a lot about psychological safety and the ability to bring a project forward and show your best effort in a comfortable environment where even if your venture doesn't succeed, there is a safety net that will catch you and then throw you up even higher, right? And so I think that's quite different inside a company like Alphabet than it might be on the outside, where you have to fight tooth and nail to keep your business going, even if it doesn't make sense to keep your business going. And instead, we really look at everything that we learn and try to iterate very quickly. And if we find out we're not working on the right thing, it's time to do something else in a way that we don't abandon the people who were trying in the previous effort as they adapt to something new.
No, it makes sense. And Wendy, is it any different for you on the like chicken and egg side? Do you come up with concepts? Was Truebird an idea that you or Kevin came up with and then looked for Josh or the team to kind of build it? Or do you start with, we know a great entrepreneur and we need to align them with an opportunity and a challenge?
To date, when we think about MongoDB, Business Insider, Guild Group, Zola, Nomad, Truebird included, most of them actually stem from what Tom mentioned, which is a pain point. And so we spend a lot of our time thinking through, okay, which pain points of the many that are out there do we believe there's white space? And then from there, we think through, okay, who are some of the experts or operators who have relevant experience of which then we can start forming what a concept could and should look like. Some of that concepting done internally within Alicorp. So at Alicorp, for example, we have what's called the Alicorp Brain Trust. And so these are 30 or so operators, C-suite level, various industries, and they'll help us think through, okay, what is one potential way we could solve for this pain? We have a pretty high kill rate. So we go through many, many different pain points in any given year. And only very few do we actually drill into and dig into every year where we decide, we're gonna spend a couple months dig into the space. But we have been exploring a world though, where we do co-builds. And so for example, we do have an EIR, his name is Jeff DeFlavio. He was he is the founder and former CEO of a rather large opioid addiction company here in New York that's venture backed. And he's been working with us around what are some healthcare opportunities where we need someone like his brain, both an MD, MBA, has launched a company in the healthcare space in the past where we can help ideate ways to solve pains that have not yet been solved for. So that is something that we have been building over time, is what do co-build partnerships look like?
Yeah.
So we have a relevant audience question that came in that touches on everything that each of you brought up, but how do you balance oversight on projects with independence of teams pursuing the project? What does an org structure look like?
Well, who would like to jump into that one first? Fernando, you want to?
Yeah, I can. Actually, before that, I would say we're the opposite, actually. We're people first. So I don't know if people are the chicken or the egg, but I'll let everybody decide that. But we're head on people first. They will change ideas, and they often change the ideas. We really focus on training people. And on our side, we really have this culture of not micromanaging anyone. Part of the education that we need to give entrepreneurs is how to become self-sufficient, how to make decisions. And we do deal with people that have a lot of analysis paralysis. These are people that are very technical, and because of all that information, they don't know what to do with it. So we need to figure out the right way for them to get empowered, to make decisions, to drive things on their own. And that's key. We don't want to micromanage anyone. We have a very flat structure. There's not a lot of overhead in what we do. Maybe there's too little. Maybe we should have a little bit more. But the reality is that instead of trying to spend money and resources on overhead, we're trying to spend it on building bridges or giving trainings or giving real value and benefit to our entrepreneurs.
Got it. No, that's helpful. Tom or Wendy, anything different there on kind of structure and oversight that's worth pointing out from your approaches?
So for us, we have a motto that we live by, which is a CEO's job. And this is a saying that I learned from Kevin Ryan, actually, is that a CEO's job is to ultimately make themselves irrelevant. because they've hired a phenomenal team. And that team is what executes on the vision of the company. So we've been lucky in this position that most of our CEOs, our goal for ourselves actually at Alicorp is then to make ourselves irrelevant, which means what can we do to help our CEO hire and build the best teams so that we at Alicorp only really have to be then the investor that funds the company, and then the board member that makes sure that we play a key role in managing the board alongside our founders.
No, it's helpful. And sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Sure. I mean, I would say, X has a kind of unique take on this because we don't, at the early stage, these projects are not independent companies. And so we essentially have an internal board, right? That's all internal stakeholders that help govern the individual projects and give those projects a lot of independence. But at the same time, the internal board might not have the area of expertise for, say, a medical device. And so there's also the project team itself can bring up this set of experts that really is along for the ride that really wants to help that project succeed.
Yeah, and in all three of your cases, and we'll start with you, Tom, like they're building what is typically a very risky kind of endeavor, but with greater support and structure. They have teams they wouldn't typically have out in the wild. They have access to capital they wouldn't typically have out in the wild. With that comfort, you may lose the scrappiness of entrepreneurs, the ability to like get everything you can out of every dollar versus, having sushi at Google X on a few days a week. Is that okay? Or do you focus on trying to maintain that scrappiness and that focus on feeling like a 10-person company, even with wealthy parents?
Yeah, and we are extremely scrappy, and it's actually the biggest pain point in my job is being part of this massive company, but then having very limited resources for each of these early stage technology bets. Like I don't have access to that huge pool of capital, and so we do have to be extremely scrappy at the early stage, which allows people to vote with their feet, right? Where if they believe in a project, they're going to put their effort into it, even if that's outside of their normal day-to-day job, and that really gains momentum within X and shows that people believe in the project. So I think there's definitely a lot of advantages to being scrappy, even if in theory you have the luxury of being part of a bigger company.
Yeah. Has that been an issue, Fernando or Wendy, like seeing founders that seem more comfortable and aren't doing the 20-hour days that they may do in their garage because they have support ecosystem?
Yeah, no, they're all very hard workers, but I do tell them that they're spoiled and and that they should definitely. I tell them this is not what you're living is not real life. Some days, all of the support that they get, all of these networks are not that easy to get. And as an entrepreneur myself, I remember building companies in a Starbucks in a basement where the carpet was horribly stained, and that's how you do it. That's the scrappiness of it. And in a lot of ways, they don't have to go through that scrappiness because they have the networks, they have the resources. However, what we give them all the networks and everything, it's still not enough. I mean, building companies takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of time. So they still end up finding and feeling that pressure that they need to raise more money, they need to grow fast. So we try to focus a lot on that. But there is a reality, I think, and every day I see it, that they have it way better than I did when I was building companies, and that a lot of people that are in the surroundings.
Yeah. And Wendy, that confidence, like obviously, so that might be one challenge or mistake you see founders go through, which is a greater level of comfort that they maybe should have. What are the other common mistakes you see that people should be aware as they go through venture studio type experiences of venture development?
For us at Alicorp, we primarily invest in first-time founders. And so these are founders who maybe perhaps were experienced operators. Our Shanlin Ma and Nobu at Zola, they were entrepreneurs within the World of Gilt Group and had launched this amazing company, Zola, with us. And 6 years later, Zola is just such a great company. If I look at Business Insider, even though that we've exited that company now and has a new owner, our founder and CEO, while might have had a untraditional background in the world of finance, he's still the CEO of Business Insider to this day. And so when we think about, call it founder hunger, a lot of it derives for us in being extremely first founder focused, making sure that our founders have a deep sense of understanding the pain point. That's one core area of where oftentimes we found founders fail, is they lose sight of the pain point that they're solving for the customer. We often tell our founders the competition is not other startups. The competition is the customer, because that customer's
demand profile of what they want can change month to month, especially with COVID. We're seeing things change every week. What fitness looks like, what healthy eating looks like, it changes all the time. So the moment that our founders lose pulse of what is it the customer wants, the moment that the founder loses insights around customer feedback loops and how to increase that cycle, that's when we found that our founders often fail. And so we're constantly reminding our founders, do we have a good sense of the pain? It tends to be why our founders in general that we bring on and air to be more on the side of those who were former product leaders or those who are more former GM leaders with P&L ownership where product was core to what they were building. That's the common area where we've seen struggle, if there has been some.
Yeah, that's helpful. And there's an audience question that's just asking, like, how do you find founders? Do they find you? Is it an application? Do you go out and hunt them down? Maybe starting with you, Tom, like, is X the name big enough where people are banging down your door to be a part of it? Or do you actually have to go out and seek the best talent?
Yeah, I mean, there's what we're really looking for is diverse talent with a different mindset than just a Silicon Valley, just yet another Stanford grad from Silicon Valley. Like we're already loaded. I mean, I'm guilty of that myself, right? And so we are actively looking at ways. And New York counts as somewhere from Silicon Valley perspective, it's diverse from Silicon Valley. So we are constantly trying to expand our networks to more diverse locations, whether those are international, like with any definition of diversity, we want to increase that. So please, inbound requests are always welcome. Yeah.
And Fernando, you're scouring the student base looking for the right talent. Is it only in-house? Is there external search?
I'm scouting like crazy everywhere. Yes, obviously we have a student population that are doing the programs here, and they've been scouted by our admissions team. So there's a lot of people there that we have a whole group of people looking for the best of the best on that. But for some of our other programs like Runway, which is open to anyone in the world, I do a lot of connections. A great part of my job before COVID was to travel a lot, and now is doing a lot of information meetings with people in Europe, in India, in China, wherever we can get. We've gotten entrepreneurs from Iran, we got entrepreneurs, from Singapore, and that's a big part. What we're going out there and trying to find this type of populations everywhere and this type of entrepreneurs. We do believe that the best entrepreneurs are out there everywhere in the world. So it takes a lot of time and we put the effort to do that.
Yeah. And so Wendy, once those people land on your desk, you've got interviews, you meet a founder, a potential entrepreneur, like what are the characteristics she needs to have or he needs to have that you're looking for? What are you assessing people on when you're deciding the right leadership for your ventures?
We have a motto that we live by as well, which is references matter more than any interview. And as we think about founders, their job is to be able to recruit an incredible team. A founder's job is three things. It's make yourself irrelevant, and you do that by making sure that you always have money in the bank, the company's funded, that you are able to hire a phenomenal team, and that you set clear goals. All of those stem from storytelling, and they stem from an ability of a founder to recruit, and moreover, have had a track record where people love working for them. What's amazing about our founders at Zola even is, the team that Shannon and Nobu brought together, these were all former people that worked for them at Gilt, even after sunsetting a part of that business at Gilt. So much so they still wanted to follow them into this new venture. At Alicorp, we use a mixture sometimes of external recruiters, the executive search firms. Many of them actually do just come inbound to us. We've had the benefit of what we've called constellation creation. MongoDB, DoubleClick, which is the originator of Alicorp, has gone on to launch 50 new companies, all in aggregate value, having fundraised over $1 billion. Gilt Group alone has launched another 50 set of companies here in New York City. Zola, we're seeing the beginnings of a constellation form of new founders. And so with that, there is a constant nurturing that we're doing in our own people and our own talent. Something that we also spend a lot of our time in is being thesis driven, in every quarter laying out a few different areas of research that we get excited about. Right now, one area of research is in psychedelics and its use case around clinical outcomes. And so what we're doing is, connecting with the Yales, the Stanfords, the Harvards, the MITs, all the academics who have focused around the medicinal value of psychedelics. Not sure what the outcome is just yet. We're really just kind of noodling around what pain points do exist. But through that work, we get to talk with operators who maybe are a bit more untraditional than we normally have invested in the past.
Mm. And that's a great example. We'll help Fernando out and say, okay, the chicken's the entrepreneur, the egg's the idea. How do you source the opportunity? Like Alicorp's looking at psychedelics. What does Cornell Tech decide to focus on? And how do those ideas get onto your radar?
Well, we're kind of agnostic as long as it has impact. So we do focus on digital, which we think right now we're better suited to help. Not that hardware is not interesting, but we are better suited to do software. And in that, we have some hub areas that are of interest. They're not restrictive, but we do know that either media technologies or health technologies or urban technologies are key components of having an impact, particularly in New York City. And in the New York economy. So that's that. We decided that as the Jacobs Institute, those are the hubs that we have. We want to continue to grow that. But if there comes any other idea that we feel, oh, this is amazing and it's just a little bit out there, then we definitely would take a look at that. Yeah.
And Tom, obviously with Alicorp and Cornell Tech, they may be excited by opportunities that don't qualify as moonshot within X and kind of the ambitions around addressable market or population impact that you drive. How do you guys decide what's big enough to get to invest in and to bring on talent to focus for?
Yeah, I mean, I think identifying a big problem can be relatively straightforward. There's so many in the world that could affect, we think of things that could affect 1 billion or more people. But what Wendy said about the pain point, I think is really critical, because if you have generalists thinking, oh, okay, transportation, like I want to safe, reliable, fast transportation is a critical challenge in the growing urbanization around the world. Like that, I just said a big problem. That part was pretty easy. What the heck do you do about it? That's the hard part. And so as Wendy was saying, like we talk to industry experts, we bring in generalists, but then those generalists talk to industry experts to really try to understand where the constraints are, where we could apply technology from outside that area. And that's how we go about finding those eggs.
Yeah.
There's an audience question that's coming in about how, similar to what Fernando was just talking about, how do you balance and differentiate between founders that are pursuing hardware solutions versus software solutions? Because there are a number of ways you can tackle each of these big challenges.
Well, if it's software, I definitely tell them to come to me. So that's easy enough. If it's hardware, I think there's a lot of great people doing hardware. Depends on what type of hardware too. So if you wanted to do telecommunication, there's particular people for that. If you wanted to do some IoT, there's also particular people for that. I work. There's a program that is fairly similar to what we're doing, which is Activate at MIT at Berkeley. And sometimes I see entrepreneurs and I say, look, that's a great program for you. So in that sense, we're very honest of what we can do and we can't. And we just guide people to what's best for them. And that's why we make a lot of connections, because we're not really in competition. We're trying to find the best place for the best entrepreneur. So we're also trying to find that entrepreneur market fit. I don't know, I just made that up, but something like that.
Yeah. And Wendy, you guys have obviously, a lot of the companies that you've developed and built have been more software in the digital space. So there's an easier way to validate it. Some would argue that there's a market fit. You could test Zola with a smaller set of users without spending hundreds of millions of dollars building hardware and new technology. What do you look for that dictates this is working and we should continue to push this, versus how do you know and observe this isn't going to work, this is a failure and we need to cut back?
Yeah, but back to when I think about that in combination with the audience question, when we think about whether it's a software company or a hardware company, a lot of the company's ability to fundraise over time is, did you hit certain milestones or not? And as a founder, from day one, the moment that we fund a company, we are thinking through what are those step changes in a company that have to happen so that we can get to the next fundraising level. Is the first phase, does the first $1.5 million get us to, okay, the beginnings of a alpha or a beta product of which we have 100 users, of which then the NPS score is X, of which then the customer retention is X. We have to think through those things. And while those numbers might not be, they might change over time, it's important for the founder to realize that there's only so much money, whether it's software or hardware, that a company has access to. And so it's important to project plan ahead of time. How much people, how many people do we need to yield the simplest form of what we believe an MVP could be? As you mentioned, Shaun, software, it's easier because it's mostly a digital product. those feedback cycles and velocity and agility to change is much quicker than hardware. We are both investors in software as well as call it consumer product companies in F&B, in hardware, et cetera. And what we've realized is that you do have to fundraise. The dollar, of course, goes so much farther in software. And so when I think about software versus hardware, a lot of it comes from setting those milestones in advance and remembering what is the most simplest way I can test for a product. In terms of demand, if you hear from the customer, you almost want to be able to put the ugliest version of the product in front of someone, and it's in its ugliest form. If they say, oh my God, I need that, I want that now, you truly know you're solving for something. Versus if you present an envision or a mock-up of a product to someone, whether physical or software, and they say, oh, that's interesting, you know, you're dead in the water. You need to hear in its ugliest form, that is what I need and I want. And you cannot aim for perfection. You almost, as a product person, need to feel comfortable with putting out a product that feels a little uglier. You know, I personally like to use a website called Wayback Machine, and it shows you what sites used to look like back in the day. You can see what Business Insider used to look like. You can see what Google used to look like. And you can see most of these products look pretty ugly, but even as in the ugliest form, it still was solving a pain so much that people want to use it.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think building on that actually, Wendy, helps the iteration cycle in hardware that is slow and is painful. But if you can get out there with a ugly, beat up prototype that you've hacked together in a garage-like environment, like now you have something that you can see if you bring value to the customer with that as fast as you can, even if it's slower and more painful than a software prototype.
Yeah. And so that patience you have, Tom, with hardware, like obviously the cycle to understand a software solution or a digital product isn't going to work might be much quicker than hardware. Like building a self-driving car and getting a consumer experience is going to take some time. Where's that patience? Where do you draw the line in the sand? And then both Adi and Astro Teller, when they visited Newlab, had talked about the monkey reciting Shakespeare on a stage or a podium of some sort. Explain that kind of analogy that you guys use in validating tech.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, hardware has hard right there in the name, right? So it is harder than software, and it takes longer. So you do have to have patience, but you have to be working. The part about the monkey reciting Shakespeare is if your vision, the egg that you want to make is a monkey who's standing on a pedestal who's reciting Shakespeare, most people would say, great, I know how to get started on this. I'm going to go make this pedestal. When in fact, if you spend your time making the pedestal, the hard part of the problem, the monkey of the problem, trying to get that monkey to say even one word of Shakespeare is really the hard part. So ignore the part that's easy that you know how to do, and instead jump straight into the hardest part of the problem. Try to make some hardware prototypes there. Answer the question. Don't try to make the whole product. Try to answer the question and of like what would be the critical blocker to getting this to market in a really focused on just one narrow experiment rather than having to make the whole thing, and especially rather than trying to productize the whole thing. Like let's do an experiment. Let's keep as narrow as we can at the beginning, but let's answer the hardest part of the question, and that can help you then gain the confidence in this step change. Oh wow, I did the hardest part. Like the rest is all engineering, which is also very difficult. But at least you have the confidence that like let's keep investing in this for the time frame that it takes.
Yeah. And Fernando, like, where's that balance? Do you often have to pressure people to acknowledge something's not going to work, the concept's not going to move forward, or is that something they typically come to quite quickly on their own?
No, they resist it, of course, all the time. So we do have actually, I think a year. It's a good stopping point for us. Our programs are either 1 year or 2 years. But what we really focus is in that first year, we think that they need 6 months to a year to understand the customer problem. What is that? What are the problems? How do you get that monkey to do what it's supposed to do? What is the real problem? Are you actually getting that good fit? And we tend to dissuade them from just going and coding. It's first really understand the problem, and we give them the time to do it well. So if it takes them 6 months to a year, that's fine. I think at the end of the year is when we say, okay, are you absolutely confident that you understand what is it that you need to develop, why, what's the value proposition, and that this is something that people really need? And if it is, it makes sense, then we say, okay, now it's execution. And that second year it would go. I think this would work the same for hardware too, is give 1 year for the entrepreneurs to discover if it's the right thing to do. And then either focus on execution or say, you know what, let's just cut it. That's that, let's not go forward and just shut it down. And basically we run in 1 year cycles. That's what we do. In that 1 year cycle, either we continue or we kill it. But again, I'll say there's a lot of resistance. Entrepreneurs just keep going, and at some point in time, it's very difficult to get them to recognize that there's nothing there in what they're trying to do.
And so if we're going through this journey, Wendy, you've found the great talent, you've got the idea, we're working on hallucinogenics or different micro dosing for medical outcomes. Now they de-risk that technology, that product, you start to believe in it, you want to, then they need more capital. Is that point, is Alicorp focused on being the next funder of that capital, or when do you decide it's okay for external funding? And also one of the unique parts of venture studio models is often the founders have smaller ownership percentages because they've been able to secure other support and capital early on. Is that a factor that you have to keep an eye on, that the founder remains motivated as the company grows and seeks external or additional capital?
Yeah, so for us at Alicorp, think of us as a co-founder on the cap table on the common, of which then we have more ownership because we then invest the first $1 million to $1.5 million as, call it, the lead pre-seed investor. So that's sort of how we sit on the cap table when we launch companies. And when we think about founder instead of founder motivation, we think a lot about, is this founder appropriately paying for their salaries, right? Oftentimes founders, when they're bootstrapping their business, will of course underpay themselves. But that's hard though, because if then you are a parent and you have a couple kids, or if you just bought a new house. So we think a lot about what's market rate fair. And so we have access to a ton of HR databases to help us determine, okay, what is market rate fair on salary? What is then market rate fair on equity? If you look at Zola, all of our founders are still there to this day. Same thing with Business Insider, with Nomad Health, et cetera, of which it's already been 5+ years for many of them. When we think about then, so we've now invested in a new company. Humming Homes is one company that we just launched. It's think of it as like the Intuit, but for tax management for your house. And so we brought that founding team a year ago together, it's the 3 of them. And our goal in the first month was to set, what are those milestones we want to achieve in the next year? In that year, our goal was to reach X amount of homeowners and to have a X% growth on homeowners month over month. Those were our signals for essentially, is our product working or not? Luckily, we've been really excited about the growth that we've seen on the platform and how homeowners are using us. Now we're in the process of fundraising. So we just kickstarted about 2.5 weeks ago. And so when we think about fundraising, we think often about those milestones. And are we hearing signals from the customer around demand? In this case for Humming Homes, how many of the pilot customers that we brought in are naturally recommending our product to other homeowners? 60%, over 60% of our homeowners coming in are entirely word of mouth. If you compare that against industry benchmarks, that's unheard of. That's almost 3x that of what you normally see. Yeah. Those are the signals that help us determine, are we creating a product people want versus not? It's important in your business to understand what is benchmark in your industry. Are you below average, above average, or exceeding?
And is the equity approach, Tom, for X, like obviously you're within a corporate entity, you have Alphabet equity that might be a compensation vehicle for employees, but then you also have a potential venture that they're building. How do you balance those needs and those incentive assets for you to play with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's tricky because I think the tables have turned in the last decade. The tables have turned in favor of founders to a large extent, and so there are great terms out there. Like people are able to continue having control to a large extent that they maybe weren't able to if they founded a company 10 years ago. I think that's a challenge at X. Is you don't have the control. If you start a project at X, like it's within this bigger ecosystem, and if it doesn't make sense for Alphabet as a whole, the thing we like to do is to enable people to spin out if a project doesn't make sense at X and if they've made a lot of progress there. So an example of that is Dandelion, which is actually in New York, in upstate New York, which is a geothermal energy company for home HVAC. And there, the technology fit was not right for X. We thought it could still have a big impact in the world. And so we said, bless you, Kathy, go forth and be successful. And she's out there, making sales every day. And so I think that's like the downside protection is much better at X than it might be elsewhere, in the sense that even if it's not quite a fit for Alphabet, we want to enable entrepreneurs to continue their journey.
Yeah, and we talked about those milestones that trigger continued investment. You've decided the project at X is still worth it. It's solving key challenges and milestones. Then that next evolution is like a Waymo. You're deciding, actually, this is ready to be spun out as a subsidiary, maybe raise external funding. How do you validate that it's ready for that kind of big graduation?
Right. So there is kind of a phase transition, one of these big stage gates, as there's one coming from the early pipeline where we have many early stage confidential bets to make sure that like most of those don't work out. And then when we publicly announce something, the target on our back is much bigger. And so the PR alone is significant. So we have to be fairly confident when something's a publicly announced X project. And then what you're referring to, Shaun, is as an X project becomes mature, it can become its own Alphabet company. And that then is like, there's real market fit, business model. They have the option to take external capital now. A couple of these companies have. And so there's, a big hurdle there when you're becoming another sister company to Google as an Alphabet company.
Yeah. Got it. And so for Fernando, in your world, like an often model has been IP licensing or royalties, that when the companies end up graduating and commercializing, that's the tether or the relationship back to academia where the research was done. Is that evolving? Is that different today? And where do you see that going?
So that is one of the things that we're evolving as experimentation, and that's very particular of the Jacobs Institute, that we don't take royalties. So that our license agreements with them are licenses that are exclusive, perpetual, transferable, and have no royalties. This is not done traditional in academia, but we wanted to take that chance and show that being this hyper-friendly to entrepreneurs actually worked out pretty well. So we take equity, and we also don't take a majority equity. The top that we take right at the beginning is 6%, and then we get diluted with everybody else. So we really try to make it very hyper-friendly. Anytime that you try to take money out of these very, very early stage entrepreneurs, particularly with cash, is a disaster. So we try to really say, okay, our involvement in this is the equity, and we're very friendly with equity too. So much better than YC, much better than 500 startups or any of the other programs out there. And that friendliness really pays off when then they go out and they start talking to a sophisticated investor. Wendy made the perfect case of a sophisticated investor that takes a look at this company and now needs to be attracted to that. So we say, okay, we did our job. If you're able to pass that gate where a sophisticated, good investor comes and takes a look at you and says, yes, this is good, now I can continue to do it. So we don't want to continue to do investments. Our goal would be more to take the money and keep investing in very, very early stage entrepreneurs. Again, try to figure out the ones that just have no idea how to get started.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And
there's an interesting audience question coming in actually that is talking about, he asked, there are a lot of pain points that are currently existing that you can choose to address. What about the pain points that don't exist yet? So how do you evaluate pursuing a challenge that might be on a longer timeline, potentially that has a 1 billion plus impact?
Sounds like that might be for you to start with, Tom.
Sure. I mean, there are more challenges out there in the world that we can deal with. We're just one small company in the world. So there's no shortage of potential targets and ways to make the world a better place. In terms of the problems that don't exist yet, I mean, honestly, I think that the problems that do exist today are significant enough that we should address some of those. we do think a lot about the ethics and the impact of the technologies that we're working on, whether it's increased automation. What does that mean for the future of the workforce? How can we address some of those problems? So we have probably a specific focus in that direction. But there's so many problems all around us. Like we have our hands full.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot today. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Fernando.
Yeah, no, I wanted to make a point there because I kind of I don't like that idea of that we're solving a problem that doesn't exist. I don't think that is really what it is. So either you're solving a problem that does exist but is long term, right? So it's take a long time to do, and it's a moonshot, which is what Tom is doing. But it's a real problem. It's just that it takes a lot of effort to actually do it. Or you're in love with your technology and you just want to push it. So those are two very different things. I would say we discourage a lot, be in love with your technology and push it. That's not a good thing. We really discourage it fast. But if you're finding a place where you know that there's a big issue, but that big issue is complicated to do, yeah, we like to support that. And usually there is a problem to be solved there.
Yeah, thanks, Fernando. We've had a lot of problems with technology first also. I mean, there's so many cool technologies that you can totally fall in love with, and that is not always a recipe for success.
Wendy, I saw you unmuted. Do you have something to add there? Or no?
Yeah, sure. I was going to say for us at Alicorp, there's two approaches for how we think about ideation of pain points. One is the bottoms-up approach, of course, which is through organized focus groups, talking to people who are experiencing the pain and servicing it from there. Another area of how we think about it really is actually the top-down approach. For us, there are so many publicly traded companies that are out there where a fundamental shift has happened that now deems this old incumbent really no longer relevant. A classic example is in the case of MongoDB, for example. For MongoDB, you had these large incumbents, the SAPs, the Oracles, and whatnot. Databasing has been around forever. It's not entirely a novel concept by any means at all. The fundamental shift, though, that occurred was the rise of open source and the rise of NoSQL. And moreover, the ignored customer segment that was that, in our case, nonprofits, small startups could not afford SAP Oracle. It was too expensive for them. So that born the beginnings of 10gen, or I guess MongoDB. Can we create a new database focused around NoSQL, focused around open source for this ignored beachhead customer? And so that fundamental shift and that ignored customer segment tied to an incumbent is how we often think about pain points. Our belief is that a totally new net known pain point is harder to uncover, but rather there are many pain points that are out there that are merely just adaptations of ones that have existed in the past, where technology has rendered the old incumbent no longer relevant. It'll be interesting to see a day where maybe search looks entirely different than what it looks like right now. Who knows? Of which something will render Google no longer entirely relevant. Something could render MongoDB no longer entirely relevant 10 years from now. And those cycles are often in 10-year waves.
No, totally true. Well, we've got a few more minutes. The last one I wanted to get your perspectives on from everybody was, we've talked a lot about finding the right entrepreneurs, the right problems. What's the flip side of the entrepreneur finding the right venture program or venture studio? Like, what's your guidance to people out there on what to look for in the programs, how to know you're the right fit for it, what the right structure and economics look like, just the guidance for people who are considering this as a path for building a venture? I don't know, Wendy, if you want to start with that.
In what we do, so Alicorp as a evergreen venture studio, we've been around since 2007. So in New York, at least, we're really one of the godfathers of what we do. Since then, you have seen things like Juxtapose, Atomic out on the West Coast. And because we invest also in other companies that aren't our own, we've had the luxury of investing in some of those companies that come out from other venture studios. I would say ultimately, at the end of the day, because for us at least, we are another co-founder with the founders that we're building with. Fit is the most important thing, culture. I would encourage any aspiring entrepreneur who wants to work with a venture studio or incubator, conduct brainstorming sessions with them. For every candidate or person that we work with, we do at least, sometimes a month or two of brainstorming sessions with them. And that is one of the most important things I think you can do, is get a feel for how those founders worked with the venture studio in the past. Has that tenure of that founder endured over time? That's a reflection on the studio itself. And how do you then in a brainstorming session have proper discussion around dissent? Oftentimes people have different opinions, and how people unpack voices of dissent is really important. And so the interview process, call it, is not a standard one. Rather, it's one that's baked around brainstorming together. It's around exercises together, not one of, here's a homework assignment with a bunch of data sets. Please analyze and respond back to us and give us your deck presentation. That's not how it works, because in the world of starting a company, there is no roadmap that's been paved.
Yeah.
As a founder, you have to be okay paving it.
And Fernando, are students today picking academic institutions based on their ability to support them in venture creation, and how do they decide if what the Jacobs Institute does is like the right fit for what they're looking to do?
Absolutely, they're picking it because they know that it's going to help them in their entrepreneurship journey. And I think that not only Cornell Tech and Cornell University, but Columbia, NYU, Georgia Tech, Stanford, all of them are now attracting people that know that they're going to go there because they're good places to build, to build their entrepreneurship goals, and that's in their minds. So I think what Wendy said is absolutely true. I usually call it you have to also do due diligence. Right. So there's people doing due diligence on you. You have to do your own due diligence, talk to people. Yep. What was that TV show, Love at First Sight? Like, things don't work out that way. That's not it. That is TV. That is not real life. Talk to people, do your due diligence, really understand the culture, the disagreements. And there's another thing that I do tell entrepreneurs and people that apply to these programs is, let's come together and be very, very clear. What are the expectations? What is it that you're getting? What is it that you're asking? What is it that you're getting? What is it that you're expecting? Now, a lot of accelerator programs out there, I think that they give money for equity, and then they give you a whole list of stuff, right? So like, oh, I have these Rolodex, right? So these 20,000 Excel rows, and that's not a real thing, right? So what I say is, have your expectations be what you know that's attainable. So if they're giving you money and then they're giving you a space and they're saying, and we have some mentorship that we can support, figure it out as I get money and a space. That's that. So the basics that I know that are concrete I'm going to get, the rest is gain. And I think that setting those expectations right really helps entrepreneurs succeed in what they're doing. And otherwise it becomes frustrating. There's a lot of anger afterwards that you said that you were going to do something. So you have to connect and have those expectations be the same.
It's brilliant guidance. All right, Tom, we got 2 minutes left. You can finish us off with any last words of wisdom.
Well, I liked a lot what you said, Wendy, about how the organization is like a co-founder for the entrepreneur, and that you're going to build this together. And so make sure you have the right incubator or venture lab or whatever, both for your personality and for your need. And the good news for entrepreneurs is there's a lot more options out there today than there were in the past. And so I think there's really great people to co-found companies with when you think people as these organizations.
Awesome. Well, amazing. Thank you all three of you for joining. Alexandra, for being a great MC as always. There's a quick survey for anyone in the audience if you'd like to give us your thoughts on this event. But once again, thank you, Wendy, Fernando, and Tom for joining us today. And we'll speak to you all soon.
Thank you.
That's fun. Thanks.
Thank you. That's awesome.